You're listening to the Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast, learning leadership concepts through life experience. Welcome, friends, to another Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast. I'm Alex.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Alex.
Wait, I'm confused.
Oh, wait, I'm Zach.
I'm John.
Sorry about that.
I'm glad you didn't tell me that about that until just now. I appreciate that. Anyways, we're glad to have you. Thank you for listening, first off. It's a thankful time of the year, and we thank you.
It is, and I'm looking forward to this podcast, which it sounds like it's going to be one that's a bit different.
Most definitely it is. But before we get into what we're going to talk about today, how about we recap a little bit of what happened in the last couple of weeks? I don't know, Alex, tell me what happened during the
chat
session.
I'm Alex, and during this chat session, we actually talked with my mother, who broke down leadership concepts from the perspective of a mother and basically just revealed all of my deepest, darkest childhood secrets. And it's just all laying bare out there for the world to pick up.
Yeah, so I believe your girlfriend should listen to this podcast.
I told her we canceled it. She does not know.
Alrighty, and before that, we talked about dealing with your family during the holidays. Other Alex, what's the deal with that?
Well, if I remember correctly, it's been a couple weeks, but I think we talked about that during the holiday season with families, it can be a really challenging environment to grow self and manage your own emotions. And if one can engage family members with curiosity, invite stories, and do something just a little bit different than you've done in the past, that change is possible, but not easy.
Yeah, and that was the last podcast. And now, today's podcast, we usually do some fables within here, and I would tell you to take your scrunchies out and get your hair all loose. But we're actually going to do something a little bit different this podcast, and it's gonna be a little bit different. As I was thinking through, and we were thinking about the holidays, one portion of the holidays that is difficult for some people is the holidays themselves because of different wounds they might have. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about, leading the wounded today and what that looks like. And so holidays can be tough for people, whether that's because they've lost somebody or whether that's because they don't have family around. There might be cutoff there. Lots of different situations. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit deeper, a little bit more heavy, I would say, but I think appropriate, especially for the holiday season. So with that, I believe I'll kind of give a little bit of my background and talk about this whole wounded thing. So I would say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, this word wounded came to my brain. So I lost my sister when I was 19. She was a major staple in my family, as I would say one of the leaders of my family, if not the stronger leader, had a lot of influence and really a lot of good influence. And so one of the happiest persons I've ever known. Can't wait to see her again one day and miss her dearly. And that left a wound for me, one in which has been licked many times over, much like an animal, in which I keep going back to certain things, certain vices, or certain ways of thinking that has not allowed it to fully heal or maybe even scar over. And something that I've been this has been, I'm 34 now. It's been some time now. And so as I was talking to somebody the other day, I don't know why this was something that I never thought about before, but it struck me. And they said, other people have wounds too. You're not the only one that is wounded. And that's what started making me think about this podcast and what was going on there. And so that's kind of a little bit back of my background and where I've been thinking about this whole wounded thing. And so, gentlemen, I don't know if you have any questions about that or...
Yeah, one of the questions I have is, so you're 34 now, 19,
Yeah.
You were 19, so it's been 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay. How have you responded differently in the last several years versus how you responded initially Do you see a change in even processing that? And I'm just wondering, some people say you never get over it. It never gets easier. And those are blanket statements that aren't true for everyone. But for you, over the 15-year period, how have you dealt with it differently? Is there one particular way you felt like you've done it something different?
Yeah, first off, I want to thank you for that question. I think one of the things that I would say is somebody who's listening to this podcast or anybody who's lost somebody, I think one of the things that maybe even haven't lost somebody who've wounded, which is everybody, they want somebody to ask about these things. Even though it is scary, they want somebody to be curious enough to ask about those things. And so I appreciate that straight from the get-go. So thank you, John. So, 15 years. So I would say, as far as the wounding goes and things like that, obviously the freshness when she passed away put me into a different role. And I've talked about my role before of feeling like I need to be the strong one of the family. And I'm the fixer, and I'm going to make everything better. Much similar to what my sister actually, and she didn't do it in a way that was like, I'm going to get in here and do things. But she lowered the anxiety so much in our family that I felt like that was my next job that I needed to do. So dealing during the holidays with that, and people say that it's never going to get any better, like it's just taking a long time. It does take a long time, I will say that. But especially during the holidays, there are different triggers. So you listen to this song, there's certain songs that I can think of that Brooke and I, this is my sister who passed away, we had a good time listening to. And that could bring happy triggers and that can be bad triggers. I actually talked to my mom today about this. And here's what I found interesting, especially when it comes to systems theory and the leadership we talk about and leading yourself. When we talk about leading the wounded, there's a lot of it when we talk about systems theory is about leading yourself in a lot of ways. We talked about self-differentiation, all that stuff. And she said, it's the state of mind in which she hears that song sometimes. So there's a song, I don't know what it is, there's some Christmas song that talks about, we need a little Christmas right this very minute, that song.
We need a little Christmas right this very minute.
And bring in the next octave.
I don't even know the song.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. You don't know the song. Anyway, so there's a part of it that says, we always thought it was interesting that, of course, my sister and I would always pick on this. We need a little slappy is some of the lyrics within the song says we need a little slappy, which then led to actually slapping each other. So instead of thinking of that, now that's pretty funny, but my mom was telling me, when I think about that brings a happy memory along. So there's some of that playfulness that we talk about, especially when we talk about leading, even yourself, like thinking of those playful parts. Now there's going to be issues, when you go to, not every song says we need a little slappy in it, right? Okay, so we've got Oh Holy Night and all these slower, sadder songs possibly. And so, but I thought that hit me at a point where I was like, it's almost a state of mind of, okay, so let me think about how I want to respond to this occurrences happen. This trying to get me to react in a certain way, but instead of reacting this way, which is very difficult, maybe I'll respond in a different way to that. So I would say, and this is this is a long pontification upon the question that you asked, but I would say in the last few years, I would say that things have changed a lot when it comes to my responses. Instead of being so reactionary maybe to certain things, and not that I still am not saddened and tearful, and I think those are all healthy things actually, to cry. But my response to those have been different, and to even, I would say to even other people, I think as a wounded person, which we all are as we sit in this room, part of me was like, and this is silly to even think about, okay, so Zach is telling me about something that's really hurt him. I don't know what it is. And then me to think, this is seriously what I've thought in the past is, well, I have something worse. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, you really don't understand, and you'll never understand me because you're, wounded because of this, and I don't see that as something big. Mine's worse, and so whatever. You know what I mean? And so that can really lead you down a very dangerous path, to where nobody can heal you then. And I'm not saying that, and I think all of the three of us could sit here and say, there isn't some person's going to come in your life and be like, "Oh, I'm here to heal you." But there is something to be said about finding people around you that will be comforters too.
So one thing I took from that is that comparing your wounds to other people was one of your triggers. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
So then would you say that your healing process, specifically over the last few years, the culmination of that, would you say minimizing your response to triggers? So you have a whole bunch of triggers and you're taking each one and you're compressing it and you're choosing how you respond to that. Would you say that correlates to how you view yourself as healed? Like you're just triggered less now? Maybe not healed, but...
I don't know if I'm triggered less.
Yeah.
I just think my response to the triggers has changed over time. And so instead of reactively going into, I don't know, I'm trying to even think, the comparison model and saying, maybe he's taking a step back. Because I think initially you're going to react that way, but then sitting back and thinking through, why am I reacting this way? And maybe what's the proper response instead of what's the reaction that I'm having? And so I would say, does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems a lot of it stems from this concept of emotional versus rational spheres. Are you, when you're wounded, you're more likely to respond from that emotional place. You're going to react rather than take the time to thoughtfully consider a response.
Yeah, and I think this leads to something else that I think you guys can talk of, is being okay. Like, something that I've been learning too is, okay, I've had this emotion and I don't feel really good. I'm sad. Today I am sad. And being okay with that. Maybe, Johnny, could talk about, like, what does that mean, just being okay? And it doesn't have to be on an emotional level, but I think there's something to be said about being okay with things where they're at and not having to, this is a big part of me, coming down to fix it or to come up with a reason why this is happening or anything like that.
I almost have an opposite story of yours. So I had dinner with my sister last evening, and we were talking about family and where we've come from, and what makes me have the interest that I do have, and leadership and developing others, and where's that come from. And so in my household growing up, my mom passed away suddenly back in 2009, and it's odd to me to hear maybe somebody post on Facebook, it's been a year since Mom's been gone. They might say something like that, and I think about her every day. And just to be perfectly frank, there are weeks that I go by, and dare I say months, that I don't think about my mom at all. And April 21st is the day she passed away. April 21st can come and go, and I'll be, oh, that's right, Mom did pass away then. And I don't know why it doesn't impact me, and I won't speak for my sister, and I'll let her talk for herself should she choose to do so, but it just doesn't, I don't think about it much. And I also, as an individual, tend not to feel real deeply, and I'm wondering if there's a connection between, there's a relative distance between my mom and I, and I would say that my siblings would agree that there was distance between them and her as well. And so maybe that distance leads to not much emotion, because I can be I can be an emotional person, but I also can be pretty stoic. And so, as you pose the question, what do I do with that? Do I fix it? I don't think I do. I'm curious about it, and I'm interested in connecting with family and thinking through that more carefully, but I don't know that that's a dogged pursuit that I have to figure out. but it does make me curious, and I'm interested in looking at it from a different angle and being thoughtful about it without obsessing about it. So my story is very different from yours.
And I haven't had as deaths as close to me in terms of immediate family as you two are discussing, but in a similar way, the holidays always bring up thoughts of my grandfathers. I have lost both of my grandfathers 3 years apart, many years ago when I was younger. But Valentine's Day was when we lost one of them, and the weekend of Father's Day, I believe, was the other. And so those 2 days are always very full of memories and triggers. They're just associated with the loss of my grandfathers now. But for me, it's that and a very few other triggers that I think about as compared to my grandmothers, who I know think about their loss every day.
Yeah, and those are very different things. By the way, thank you for sharing, gentlemen. That was it was good for me to hear those different things, especially from somebody who's comparing these things, as I've been wont to do. So specifically, being okay with these emotions,
Or lack of emotion.
Yeah.
I remember. Well, here's an interesting thought. I can remember my grandpa passing away when I was in 8th grade. So this is my dad's father, and lived in North Carolina. The grandfather did, and I saw him maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Didn't have a particularly close relationship with him, and I remember going to the funeral and seeing people crying and me not feeling sad and wondering if there's something wrong with me. So I remember forcing myself to cry, which, you can do with actually not too much difficulty, because I thought that was the right thing to do. But I remember thinking later on, well, I wonder if other people forced tears like I did, because I sure felt fake. And so that's the first, death I can remember of a relatively close relative, and me feeling relatively numb. And I'm wondering if distance. So Brooke and you were close.
Yes, very close.
And so with that closeness comes pain, and with distance might come numbness. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, interesting. But still, would you say there's still some amount of pain, or is it just a different form, or just numbness, or emptiness, or is there a wound? Is there not a wound? I don't know. I'm just...
If one is numb, one can't feel.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I can answer that question.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, from the outside looking in at the two of your responses, I'm viewing you two at two different ends of the closeness farness spectrum, right?
The spectrums for you.
Right. I love spectrums. I think that when you can phrase it as a spectrum, it feels so tight and concise and well packed. But we talk about how your response to Brooke's death was taking on a new role that involved you being very close to the other people of your family, to being the person who reacted to them to bring their anxiety levels down.
Yep.
Right? And so,
Or at least the way that I thought would bring them down.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the conscious role that you took. That was
Yep.
a temporary conviction that lasted 10 years, right?
Yeah, well, conscious and also subconscious, I would say. I mean, I think I just rolled right into it, Yeah. I don't think I necessarily sat down and wrote down, hey, this is what I need to do, but I think I just stepped right into it,
Yeah, and then, John, you're talking about how you're just a relatively muted guy emotionally. To some regards, that's how I view myself. No. So I see some similarities between the way that you responded to the death of your mother and the way that I feel about my grandfathers. But it's also different because I wasn't raised by my grandfathers.
Yeah, I would say muted is the right word. I mean, as I'm thinking through this, and I haven't thought through this for some time, so this is good for me to think through, but And I remember going to my parents' house and kind of going through some of my mom's things. So the gravity of it and the finality of it, I should say, kind of set in. And I can remember feeling, I guess, sad. But my sadness was more about a life. This is just for me how I viewed my mom, but of my mom's life being one that was full of hurt. I saw my mom as a hurting person, as I can reflect on it now, and that's it's almost strange in the sense that the sadness I feel most about is a life that was lived that could have been so much more, but she did the best she could with the hand that she was dealt. She had some difficult challenges that she overcame, and so, in some ways did not, and had a hard time overcoming with some childhood wounds. So my sadness is more about I remember thinking, this isn't the way life should be. Like someone that goes through what she went through, at least from my understanding, I just thought that was my sadness, I guess. Not so much that I lost my mom.
Yeah.
I don't know. So,
I think that's a pretty common response. I mean, even response to Brooke passing away was, this isn't the way things used. This shouldn't be happening, and that always leads into the why question of why is this happening, and we could we could talk for a while about that, but that's not where we're going here with that. So the question that I posed for this is, or the title of this is going to be about leading the wounded, and so as the question is, what do you do? So wounded being yourself, but also then people that are around you during the holidays, or maybe not even during the holidays, but I mean, this is kind of the time of the year. So you yourself, or even with people around you, thoughts. I know this is a very difficult question to answer, but any thoughts you guys have on that specific question?
When I think about this issue, I see correlations with just insecurities in general. And that's not to say that these are insecurities, but when I talk to people who are unsure of the way that they're feeling or the way that they respond to certain feelings, it always feels like I respond rightly or wrongly. I feel like I end up saying something along the lines of, if this is where you start, this is how you're feeling, or this is how you're acting, it doesn't make sense to say anything other than, this is how I'm currently doing things, and owning that and going from there. Asking people, is this how you deal with it? We talked in a previous episode, a great way to relate to other people, to be curious about them, is to take a situation that you're currently engaged in and say, have you had a situation like this in the past, and see how they've responded, which can provide insight to yourself.
Yeah.
And can also provide new depths into that person.
And this is huge. I mean, I can think of certain people that I've talked to. I think of my friend Esther, who we went to the same school, and she went through something similarly, and we were able to discuss how we've dealt with certain things. And it doesn't have to be the exact same thing. I mean, she lost her sister, but I think even just hearing from John, and hearing your story too, Zach, like, has really helped me out as well. So that's really strong. Yeah.
and I think, you mentioned earlier about being a fixer or being the resource in your family that had to lower the anxiety of just being able to walk alongside someone and be. I can think of my wife and a friend of ours, but more of a friend of hers, that was going through a rough period in marriage and eventually ended up in divorce. And my wife Jennifer reached out to her in several different ways and never heard anything back from the person that was going through a difficult period of their life. But later on, communicated with her the appreciation that, for whatever reason, chose not to acknowledge the efforts of my wife, and did, but perhaps may not have, but still of being present and to let people know I'm thinking for you, I'm praying for you, and staying connected, but also giving space. So I think of that idea of individuality and togetherness. So giving some space, but also staying connected in some way, I think is important.
Yeah, and we did discuss this on the last podcast too. Man, I have so many different things I could say here, but also you don't have to say anything. I think a lot of people try to figure out, okay, this is going on with this person. What am I supposed to say? Nothing in some cases. In a lot of cases, saying nothing. That closeness, I mean, I can think of myself, and I think you guys would be right here with me, is when I'm hurting really bad, I don't really want to talk to anybody, but it's kind of nice to just have somebody there too. And I know that's difficult, especially during this time when you're feeling alone. I would strongly encourage you to go find somebody. Don't be sitting at home if you can. Reach out. And we talked last podcast about family systems and how important they are. If you've cut off from your family, we strongly encourage you to try to get reconnected to them in some way, shape, or form, because that is going to, in the long end, we believe that that's going to be more beneficial for you than just, and we don't give much advice here, but that's one of the things that through the Leadership and Bones System series we've talked about is there's something to it. We encourage you to be curious to figure out what that is.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
And one last thing that I want to throw out there is just this thing. I've been working through this, and I might have mentioned it to you before outside of the podcast, Alex, but I've been thinking through this idea for a couple of years now of, I'm thinking in spectrums, of course, but the two common themes that I see in my relationships that are necessary to varying degrees is presence and intentionality. I know there are those people who are really good at being intentional in my life, and I crave their presence, and I feel close to them, but I'm really not, because I don't have that presence. And conversely, I have people who are around me that I don't feel that close to, that I know are always around, but in fact, I'm probably closer to those people than the people who are very good at being intense, though not present. And the biggest, strongest relationships in my life, I found, are the people who balance this idea of presence and intentionality. And walking that line. And I think that plays some part here in that you're talking, Alex, earlier in this podcast you said, like, it just helps to have someone ask you those questions so you can talk about them. But 10 seconds ago you also said, oftentimes you don't want people to ask you anything at all. And that's just a hard line to discern. And there is that balance between just being there but also knowing when to talk and when to act.
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. That is super important. And as I say that, like, don't say anything, and there's sometimes you don't need to say anything. I mean, there's the balance there. Yeah, for sure.
And I would encourage those on the receiving end of that to define self and say, I appreciate your interest, but I'd prefer not to talk about that right now. Mm-hmm. And for one that's on the asking end, to not be offended by that.
Yeah.
But also, if you want to talk about it, say, I'd like to talk about this. So define self to another, I think on both ends is really helpful.
Yeah. Well, unless you guys have anything else to say, this has been a very different podcast and more somber, I would say. But at the same time, I would just like to say publicly, I love you guys, and I thank you for your constant encouragement with me, and so I want to just say that out loud, and those people who are listening, you know what? I love you too. I really do. I really do appreciate, not just because you're listening to us, but like deeply care. I don't know who you are, but I do know quite a few of you. So I just want to thank you. And yeah, I just hope that your holidays and your Christmas and whatever else you have going on are just a good time to connect with family. And think about the different responses that you have. And so that's for me, and thanks for listening.
Well, as Alex, I appreciate your love,
and
love you back.
As other Alex, I just want you to know that I think you have great hair. Not to make it superficial, but
That's okay. I appreciate that, and I love it as well. So to close us out here, you can get a hold of us at the of podcast at gmail.com, the of podcast at gmail.com.
You can't remember it. How are our listeners going to remember it?
And
Oh, man.
we're on the YouTubes and on the Simplecast. You can get us there. I know that John is continually pushing his MySpace,
Yes.
but
Up to 3 followers. 2 of them have passed away, so I'm looking to replace them.
hey, we just talked about this, man. This is very raw.
It's a sensitive subject.
So, and one is like the creator of MySpace. He's like, do you remember? You always get the one guy who owns MySpace.
Yes. Welcome to MySpace. Yes.
Yes, he's a robot.
I wouldn't know. MySpace was way before my time.
Well, anyways, other than that, shout outs to Jesse Huffstetler who made our little jingle and the
Shellfish. What's
It's the Starfish Limiter.
oh my
right,
good
yeah.
I got it right, finally.
Yeah.
Took me
Nailed
6
it.
months.
So what does it do?
It limits tuna.
Okay.
and fantastic. So yeah, and then Jason Kuzman, the mics, the chords.
We love him.
Yes, we love you too. Anyways, thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next Overfunction Leadership Podcast. And with that, I am the actual Alex.
And I'm John trying to realize that was actually star-kissed tuna and not starfish. Just realize that.
And I'm Zach, and I'm just confuzzled.
We will see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Oh boy. Hilarious.
Confuzzled.